Honestly, just to believe in what I'm capable of, right? Like never in my wildest dreams did I think that I'd be sitting here 6 years later, having founded an organization, right? Having worked with so many great students. So I think just having those um, that belief in yourself to have this vision and then like doing things every day to make it happen.
Welcome to the Powerhouse. My name is Joshua Gonzalez, but you can call me JG. This show is for the moment before the win, when you're at the crossroads and your judgment actually matters. Each episode, I sit down with a leader here in New York City to unpack one real decision under pressure. What the stakes were, what the trade offs they faced, what they chose, and the values behind it. Then we publish a short written breakdown in the Powerhouse newsletter on LinkedIn. So the lesson is easy to share, easy to remember, and useful long after the recording. So if you ever had to make a hard call with imperfect information, this is for you. Let's get it started. So our speaker for today is a non-profit CEO and a social impact leader focused on economic mobility for low-income and first-generation students. Let us welcome CEO and co-founder of Honor Your Dreams, Josue De Paz. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor to be here, JG, with you, and excited to share a little bit more about my story.
Of course, our audience would love that because you had to make a decision under pressure between continuing with a good, stable career or doing your own thing. So take the floor. Tell us your decision story.
Yeah, so in 2019, I had kind of hit the crossroads, right? I had spent 5 years in the corporate sector. I had worked on, in a number of different roles, in both business development and account management, and I really felt like my career was taking off. Right, had been earning more than my mom had ever made. Right, so it was exciting to kind of like break out of those generational cycles of poverty that had existed in my family for a long time. And so by all means, I had been on a successful trajectory, right? So I was, at that point where I had, the financial stability that I sought for my entire life. And really was at this crossroads of understanding and trying to think through whether I wanted to continue or move into the nonprofit space. So that was kind of like the first crossroads that I faced. I moved over to Grows with Code and I would, call that a dream job. I worked with incredible people who were super thoughtful, super smart, super motivated, and really all committed to this mission of expanding computer science education for girls in the US, which is lacking. And a year into the job, was loving it, had the best team, and in March of 2020, right, everything changed for everyone. So the pandemic hit. I was working from home and still, loving the job, but ultimately was part of a layoff, right? And so I was just at this point where I was like, I just did this whole pivot. I felt like this was my dream job. It was going well. I was really enjoying it. And so I was kind of lost, right? I didn't know kind of the next direction to take. But I remember sitting on my couch with my wife and just watching these stories on the nighttime news where there were students here in New York City who were, going to parking lots or, having to go to different places to access public Wi-Fi because they couldn't log on to remote school, or students completely not being engaged in the school system because they didn't have a laptop. And that brought me back to when I was a kid and having my mom work two jobs or on the weekend, missing basketball games and baseball games and all the activities I was into just so that she could make extra money to buy us a computer. And I remember getting that computer. It was like 300 pounds. It was like the biggest computer you could think of, right? Like they're not as well designed and sleek as what Apple's making today, right? They were these monstrosities of like computers, and so I just remember in that moment just feeling like the dreams that I had for myself and like the curiosity that I had around school being supported, and I think that was a super pivotal moment in my life, right? Because somebody invested in me. And so, like, when I was on my couch in New York, I just thought about how that kind of changed the entire direction of my life, and that there were so many students here in New York who were missing that opportunity. And so I had the idea to start On Your Dreams, which is formerly called First Tech Fund. But again, I was at that point where I had just bought a home. I was in this very stable career. I was progressing in my career. For all intents and purposes, I was on this path, right? And um, I had never ever envisioned myself to be an entrepreneur. I had never ever envisioned myself like starting a business, doing anything of the like, right? That to me was never a thought. Even more so a nonprofit. I felt like, I had worked at a nonprofit. I had a limited scope and understanding of what a nonprofit was, but to start one, to run one, to fund one, was outside my biggest, greatest imagination. And so I was really at that crossroads of like, do I continue investing in my own career, trying to do impact um, for communities in a way that is not personally aligned, like with what I specifically care about, right? I wanted to specifically work with students in my community, in my backyard, who I could, empower and who I connected to, right? I was first gen. I was also undocumented here in the US. And so there were just a lot of different factors and experiences that I wanted to be able to support. And so, you know, there was a lot of trepidation and fear around starting a organization and around the things that require you when you're starting a nonprofit. And I also didn't know, like, am I actually going to be able to get the devices? Am I actually going to be able to get funding? Am I going to be able to find community partners to help me? Right? How am I going to do this in the pandemic? How am I going to find volunteers? Right? There were so many outstanding questions that I didn't have answers to. And I really just had to talk to the people in my network, the people who supported me, right? I'm only here today because of a lot of the great mentors that I had and a lot of the people who've continued to give advice. And so I had to, go to those people. I had to really sit and reflect on the vision that I had for the organization and sit and reflect on the change that I specifically wanted to make in the community. And so there was a lot of reflection. I wouldn't say not a ton because from when I got the idea to when we launched was 6 weeks. So it happened pretty quickly, but really wanted to be thoughtful. Starting a nonprofit is not for the faint of heart and also not something that you should do on a whim. Right. So I really wanted to make sure that if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this all the way. Right. And I'm going to make sure that this is something that I would want to put my name and reputation behind. Right. Because I was really pulling in all the social capital that I had built over my career to really get this off the ground by, asking folks for advice and favors and support. And so I wanted to make sure that if I was going to do it, it was going to be the real deal. So, after talking to family, after hearing a bunch of yeses and people getting excited about the mission, and then I'll conversely, after hearing a lot of no's and like, these are the 10 reasons why you shouldn't do this, I sat with it and ultimately decided to start First Tech Fund. And so we started in May of 2020 and, deployed computers, before September, before the new school year started. We started with 50 students. Each of them got a free computer. They got to keep. They also got unlimited Wi-Fi through a partnership we have with T-Mobile. And they were paired with a mentor for the school year to help them with the college application process. So we ran that program for 5 years and it was exciting. We got over 300 students in college. A number of students won full ride scholarships through organizations like Questbridge, like Posse, the Gates Foundation, et cetera. And so, I had all this anxiety about doing it. Ultimately, decided that I didn't want to stop my own fear of the unknown. I didn't want that to stop me from bringing this vision that I felt like that I had and not bring that to life, but also because I was coming from such a unique point of view of having been that student, right? Like I was the student that we were looking to serve. So I knew firsthand, the supports that I didn't have that I wish I would have had. And so that's kind of like been the ethos that I've been building around is really just being able to build a support system that I wish every student could have because talent is all over. There's so many students that I've met who are like deeply, deeply talented, super intelligent, super motivated, super ambitious. But obviously, what's not everywhere is opportunity. And so, how can I be the bridge to an opportunity in the same way that that computer was when I was a kid, in the same way that that scholarship to Loyola was a bridge for me. So, how can I be a bridge for other students who are looking to not only change their lives, but the lives of their families and the lives of their community? So, I faced the crossroad and really struggled with it. Right, like I had a mortgage to pay, I had responsibilities. I helped my mom out with some stuff, and so you know, it was a sacrifice personally. Right, like I didn't get paid for like the first year and a half until I went full time, and we had enough funding and supporters for me to do it full time. And so it was a personal sacrifice, and I was also working a tech job at the beginning for 10 months. So I was doing 8 to 8 at my tech job, and then 8 p.m. to whenever I fell asleep at my desk building the organization. So ultimately, it was like a personal sacrifice. But we're here 6 years later, and I've worked with over 500 students. So I'm very glad that I took the plunge and did it. Of course, of course.
So, first question is, I want to honor how intentional you were about building stability first. So take us into that period when you were 5 years into the corporate world, earning more than your mom ever had, and feeling like, I made it. What was your life like day to day, and what pressure were you carrying the most that people wouldn't see?
Yeah, so I think before answering that, I think it really goes back to honestly high school, right? Like my mom was always very financially conservative, so like she was always about saving and really taught me from a young age, like not to be wasteful, to be thoughtful about how I was spending. And so, um, even if she gave me an allowance, like I've always been like a saver. So I would I tell people all the time, like I still have my lunch money from like fifth grade, right? Like I've always just been that way. And so I started that first bank account in high school and started my credit in high school. And so I think it's been a long journey of financial literacy for me. Um, but ultimately was very fortunate that I had high school guidance counselors at Loyola who really supported me. And so I was very fortunate to go to Santa Clara on a full-ride academic scholarship that was specifically for undocumented students. Um, and so I started college with zero debt, right? So like I think that is a super important piece to highlight because that is not the common occurrence in the United States, right? Many people go into debt to go to school, and I think more and more students are trying to are starting to question the value of that education in comparison to the debt they take on, right? So I think that should be point number one, is that I didn't have student loan, any financial debt starting my career, right? So I think that gave me ultimately like the privilege to be able to start a company, because I think had I had student loans, the calculus would have been very different, right? Like start a company or stay here, like it's a really hard decision, right? Like, and
Of
I
course.
don't know candidly if I would have made the same decision, right? So I think me being able to start a company came from that place of privilege. The other thing is, I got married at 25. And so my wife and I have always been really um, targeted and specific about how we handle our finances. We've always both dreamed of owning property in New York. And so from the very beginning of our marriage, like we had that conversation and like we were on the same page about that, right? Like we didn't have a super extravagant wedding, right? So we went to City Hall, like literally 6 blocks from my office, and we got married, on a random day, and then had a brunch. So all in all, I think I spent less than $2,000 on my wedding. Right? So like, that's another thing you have to consider, right? Like I didn't have any wedding debt, and then that's another big category I'd say for a lot of Americans where they spend a lot, and that can be kind of like a big financial burden. Instead, we use that money as a down payment for an apartment here in New York. So I think like I was just very specific in like how I was making decisions. And obviously that came with sacrifices, right? Like I see all my friends who have these cool ass weddings with like all their friends and like these sick pictures. I'm like super jealous. But like ultimately that was not, the decision that I made. And so I think like those two pieces of information are like super important context when thinking about like the financial situation that I was in, like when starting this company, right? Because otherwise, people are gonna be like, "How did you do it? How did you sacrifice like not making money for a while?" And then I would say like that's kind of like the third piece is my wife was working a job in corporate America that allowed me to like take this risk, right? And allowed me to like make less money or no money for a couple months. Um, which then kind of like encouraged me to start the company, right? So I just want to like put it out there, right? That like my financial situation was different, and I think ultimately that's kind of like what gave me the courage to start because I think I had conditions in place which made me comfortable taking a risk, which might not be the same and it might not be the case for everybody.
Awesome, thank you. So help us understand the moment that your dream job at Girls Who Code got disrupted. Take us into March 2020. Where were you? What did you hear? What did that layoff feel like in your body and your mind right after you'd made that pivot?
Yeah, I mean, I'd been at the organization for a year. I had kind of like mapped out my territory. I had 9 states in the South and the Southeast. So I had been flying to each of those states pretty often. I spent some time in Kentucky. I was flying down to Texas. I was flying down to Louisiana, just getting to know the partners that I was working with, whether that was like individual schools or the Department of Education. Really, what we were trying to do is bring more Girls Who Codes computer science curriculum to those schools for free and then offer training resources, get schools to adopt this so more students could have that early computer science education starting in elementary school into middle school and also ultimately into high school, right? So that was kind of the focus of my role was expanding those resources. And I'd been at the organization for almost a year before the layoff happened. I think ultimately now that I'm a nonprofit leader and deal with budgets and thinking about like kind of like long-term effectiveness and thinking about long-term budgets, like I think I have a better purview into like why the layoff happened. And I think at the time, I think the leadership made the right decision in terms of like being thoughtful about the organization's future long term. They do a lot of great work and I think have impacted like 500,000 students. And so, I didn't take it personally. We were living through an unprecedented pandemic, right?
Right.
Like, um, and so they were kind of like doing what they could. And I think, yeah, obviously, it was, like, personally hard. I'd never been laid off before. I think in the last 5 years, I'm sure, like, I think, like, at least 90% of my friends have been laid off from a job, so I don't think it was, like, a unique experience in any way. But, yeah, I kind of just, like, in the space of, I made this transition, like, now it's not working out. So, what do I do next? And I, had started looking at jobs in philanthropy and had started looking at jobs at other nonprofits but ultimately decided after seeing, what was happening that, this path was the best path for me to take.
Great, great. I love it. Um, how about next is take us into that night on the couch with your wife while watching the news about New York students going into the parking lots for Wi-Fi. What exactly did you see? How did it snap back into your memory of your mom working extra shifts to buy that huge computer when you were at, you.
Yeah, I mean, it was emotional, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think in that struggle saw so much determination and so much desire to learn and desire to succeed that, like, reflected my own feelings as a kid growing up super low income and, like, not having the resources I felt like I needed to be successful, so I think it just brought me back to that place of struggle, right? That place of want, of being in this place where you wanted to succeed, where you wanted to break from the conditions you were born into, but didn't feel like you always had the tools or the access to the tools that would help you get there. So I think in seeing that, it just brought me back to like all those experiences and then candidly also having to sacrifice time with my family because my family was working so that I could have the tools. Just feeling that feeling of like, kids shouldn't have to do this, like parents shouldn't have to work 2 to 3 jobs in order to give their kids the tools they need to be successful. So that's kind of like what inspired that desire to provide some of those tools myself, right? And to be a support in that way, so that families could, focus that budget that maybe would go to the internet or maybe would go to a computer into food or in other necessities that families ultimately have. So I think that was kind of like what it brought me back to. And there's actually like specifically a picture from my childhood when I'm sitting in front of this computer. And so it kind of like also reminded me of that moment of just being super, super excited to get that first computer. And I think eventually my mom had to move it out of my room because I was spending so much time on the computer. But ultimately that was because of the excitement of being able to learn. So it wasn't just school stuff I was learning. I also learned to play basketball by watching YouTube. And so I think like basketball was the reason I stayed out of trouble as a teen and as a kid, right? Like, and so I had wider reaching implications that I ever would have imagined.
Wow, great story. So now we'll get into the real story, the real fork in the road. Okay, so at the same time you had a mortgage and a lot of responsibility. You had an idea that felt bigger than your imagination. Starting a nonprofit in a pandemic. What were your competing paths in front of you, and what did you believe you might lose if you chose the harder one?
Yeah, I mean, there were a number of ways I could have gone, right? I think I've always been interested in doing corporate social responsibility, potentially at like a corporate company. And so I think that was something that was a big interest of mine. When I was deciding whether to start, I also, wanted to continue my career in the nonprofit sector. I was already a manager, so I was definitely interested in senior manager roles, director roles, and just continuing to progress in leadership, right? I think while I didn't have a goal in terms of sector, I've always, been in positions of leadership, and so I think that was something that was top of mind for me. I had just done management training with Grosu Code at the management center here in New York, so it felt like my career was on a path, right? And I think just the risk of disrupting that was scary for me. And also just not knowing, much about entrepreneurship. So I didn't always feel like I had the technical background to start. But I was also fortunate that my father-in-law was super supportive, and so he bought me a bunch of books about like running a nonprofit, managing of a nonprofit, and super super technical stuff like getting into like the tax code and like all that.
Wow.
There's a lot. I can't say I read it all. I'll be honest. I definitely some of it, but ultimately it was like the support, tactically and also emotionally that I needed to get started. And so I think just having people also like Jamal Adams, he is currently the president of Loyola, but prior to that was, my high school basketball coach. He was a mentor. He wrote my college recommendation. Now he's on the board of directors at Honor Your Dreams. Having folks like that in my corner who really just encouraged me to take a risk and to be brave and to be courageous ultimately also, had a big influence in my decision. So I just felt like I had the right tools, the right people, the right support. And then, a ton of my friends contributed to the first campaign. So whether it was $5 or $500, like people from elementary school, people from middle school, people from high school, from college, jobs I had worked at, like there was so much support that came from places I have never expected, right? Like people I hadn't talked to in 10 plus years were donating or sending me laptops or volunteering, right? So, the first batch of computers that we gave out, people used their personal cars. They had like full PPE suits on because it was still the pandemic. We were like delivering them outside of people's houses so that we wouldn't go in their house because we were still like pre-vaccine. So it was just, incredible to get that outpouring of support. And I think it just made, the decision ultimately that much easier to know that people believed in the vision beyond just me. And I think ultimately that's kind of like what sealed the deal was like having all these people reach out to help.
All right. So, what's a personal trade off you still feel today? Time, money, pride, peace of mind, and what made it worth paying anyway?
Well, I wasn't thinking of peace of mind, but that's definitely a good one. There's so much that goes into like running your own company. Like I think when people think nonprofit, they think of like a side project or they think of like they don't think about the fact that you still have to run a business, right? At the end of the day, like you have to do accounting, you have to do legal, you have to do compliance. Like there are so many things that go into like running and managing a nonprofit that like I had never thought of, right? Like for me, it was like do good work in the community, like help students directly. Like that was kind of like what was top of mind. But you know, like grant writing was not something that I like knew much about or had excitement to do. So I think like the peace of mind definitely, you know, I don't have a day where I like log in at 9 and close my computer at 5. Like that's just not a thing that exists.
It doesn't exist.
Um, yeah, this feels like a 24/7 role. You know, I have parents calling me, teachers calling me, you know, students calling me and texting me. And so it does feel all encompassing, all consuming, but at the end of the day, like this is what I love to do and to be part of a student's journey has been super incredible, right? Like there are students that I meet at 16, 17, 18 who I now know at 23, 24, 25 who are working corporate jobs, who are making money, taking care of their families, who are traveling, right? Like I just got a text from a student. He's like, "Hey, sorry I didn't email you back. I was in Abu Dhabi." I was like, "Who even are you? Like what?"
Wow. Was like,
so yeah,
came
and I'm
from the
like, dude,
program.
I met you and you couldn't afford a computer. Like now you're like 3,000 miles.
International business.
So it's been just cool to see that like students are kind of like living out and honoring the dreams that they have for themselves in a way that neither of us could have imagined, right? Like I never in a million years could have gotten to Harvard. There's been like multiple students that like have come through our programs that have ended up at like Harvard and these other great schools, and so um, I think like that's been the other exciting thing is to see the next generation do better than we did.
Right.
And so, even though it's all encompassing and like all consuming, I'm very grateful to be part of their story and their journey. And my hope is like they will share that with others, right? Like they're not going to just like use the resources they've taken here and that's it. Like my hope is that they learn and take this culture of giving elsewhere. And like now that they have the lessons that they've gained, they also, you know, continue that legacy and like pay that forward to somebody else.
Cool. So I want to acknowledge the speed and the risk that you took there because you went from idea to launch in 6 weeks. So walk us through the exact sequence of moves that you made. Who did you call first? What did you ask for? And how did you decide it was real enough to put your name and reputation behind?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, who didn't I call? I was like literally like, going through my phone and just like clicking one person's name after the next. But you know, in the beginning, it was really just like validating the idea and like, testing the market to see what people thought. So I basically made like a one pager of like the idea that I had and like how I wanted to launch, and then I think I sent that to like maybe 50 or 60 people to get their advice. And I was really specific that I didn't want just good like positive feedback, right? Like I also wanted to know like what could go wrong. Why is this not a good idea? Like tell me why I shouldn't launch this. And I think often we look for like that positive reinforcement that we forget that like we also need the negative to really frame what we're doing because you know in grant reports like not everyone's going to be like super excited and positive, right? So you need to get that kind of like rejection and like that concrete like honest feedback early, right? And so we got a lot of that, like a little bit too much, but we got we got
Which is a good
uh,
thing. Which is a good thing, right?
good. You know, like I think that if people feel comfortable to be honest with you, I think that means that they respect you, which at least I'll for me. So we got a lot of that, and then it was really just figuring out like the details, right? Like, what does this look like if we're successful in 3 years, right? And then like how do we then break down these like goals that we have into manageable chunks? So if we
Right.
want to do XYZ in 3 years, like what is it that we need to do in this next year to get us a third of the way? All right. And then what is it that I need to do in the first quarter of this year to get us to that year goal? So I really just try to chunk it into like manageable things because if you're like, I want to raise 500K in a year and you've never raised a dollar, it seems like an impossible goal, right? And like it seems like a not something you can actually do. But if you
Yeah,
say, I want to raise $5,000 in the next month, like that to me feels a bit more feasible, realistic, manageable, right? So, I mean, you have to be careful not to do something that doesn't feel big or like doesn't feel like growth opportunity, right? Like I always set goals for myself that are growth goals. So things I'm not
good.
comfortable with.
Right,
Uh, but ultimately we kind of like thought through those and then just thought about, okay, what are the things, the people, the resources that we need in our corner to get that done. And then, yeah, just started to go chase it. Started to reach out to people, started to, try to raise money, get legally incorporated, get the IRS designation, and just kind of took it step by step and it brought on a lot of, guidance and advisors and mentors and board members who really got
right.
us from that point. If there was a area that I didn't feel strong in, like I would try to bring on an advisor who had expertise in that space so they could really help advise me on whether it was like accounting or legal, which is not things that I've studied. So I think just taking that approach as well, it was important to have the right people backing us who had that expertise.
You probably heard a lot of opinions, from super positive, from like super negative. What was the one challenge or objection that almost stopped you? And what did you tell yourself to move forward anyway?
Yeah, I mean, it's the objection that continues to be challenging to this day, which is funding, right? Like, it is extremely challenging to break into the sector. It is extremely challenging to raise long term funding. It's extremely challenging to go from virtually unknown to like having the network and PR and like support to get your dream off the ground. So I think like that was what was most scary, most challenging, continues to be challenging, right? Like if you don't grow up in these networks of influence and wealth, like how do you then get folks to believe in your vision and your mission? And so I think that's what felt most daunting to me is like how do I like get into these spaces? But I've been super fortunate. One that I'm not scared to like say hello first and to like I think just putting yourself out there is super important and being honest about what it is you're trying to build, has been kind of a North Star. So, at the beginning, I was at 4 to 5 events a week, right? Like, just trying to get to know people and, like,
Right.
trying to tell people about what I was doing. Like, that was not
Gotta be
only
out there,
me. You gotta be outside if you wanna, like, get something done. So, it was also a good litmus test of, like, how I was pitching myself, how I was pitching the organization, right? Was I going too deep or was I saying too little, right? And so it was a good way to, like, kinda start getting out there, and then I think I've also just been very lucky, right? I'll say lucky because to get into these fellowships, you need a little bit of luck. The reason we got connected was through the Obama Foundation, and so I was also fortunate to get support from organizations like that put me in touch with other change makers, other leaders, and so I've just been very grateful to learn from their leadership, right? Because like none of this happens alone. None of this happens in a vacuum. I think like community is like the way. And so I've just been very happy and thankful that there have been those fellowships like the Obama Scholars Program
Right.
that have put me in touch with other folks who are building in different spaces because I've learned a ton from what they've been doing.
So take us into, so we're actually in the latter part of the program. So one of the last few questions, take us into the building it while surviving pace, when you were doing 8 to 8 at the tech job, then the nights building organization, you weren't paid for a long stretch. What did the season look like day to day, and what kept you from quitting when it got heavy?
Yeah, I mean, the first year was super challenging. I think like the hours I was working were really hard. I was also working on weekends
Mhm.
and like honestly at any point that I could, if I was going home to LA to see mom, like I was buying Wi-Fi on the flight and working on the flight. So I think it was definitely like a little bit of a grind, but again, I was very fortunate to have people who were supportive of me. So, my wife was one of the early board members. She really helped to just help me think about things I could not do instead of like trying to do everything, right? Because I think as an entrepreneur, you try to do every single thing, and I think it's unsustainable, right? So I also had folks kind of trying to reel me in of like, these are the things that you should try to focus on that will have the most impact, right? And so I've just been lucky to have a lot of people who help reframe things for me, uh, I think, in the beginning, it was really challenging because I had to be at events and do all these things, but I also had a full-time job. So it was hard to sometimes make it. But I would say, it just what kept me going through that time was just like the students we were working with, like getting to hear their stories, getting to know them, in working with them on like college essays. I got to know them really, really well, right? Because they were sharing important parts of their stories. So I was really able to better understand where they were coming from, what they were hoping to achieve in their life. And I think like those relationships are why we continue doing what we were doing, even though I was getting paid, even though I was working these hours. Like that first cohort of students like, was pretty inspirational personally to me. Honestly, it was sad that like after a while I hired program staff, so I wasn't in the day to day with students
You
anymore.
become a little bit abstracted, you don't get to feel the.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely the part of the work I miss the most. But I think like that first cohort, like I was in it with them. So like when they were getting decision letters, like I was getting a text like, "Hey, I got into Columbia," or "Hey, I got the scholarship," right? And I think like those moments where they saw their hard work pay off, combined with the tools we had provided, like that was like so special. And I think it's like going when it got hard.
So, looking back now, 500 plus students later, what did the season teach you about what you're capable of that you didn't know before?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just to believe in what I'm capable of, right? Like, never in my wildest dreams did I think that I'd be sitting here 6 years later, having founded an organization, right? Having worked with so many great students. So I think just having that belief in yourself to have this vision and then like doing things every day to make it happen, right? Like that's been the biggest learning is, if there's a goal I want to achieve, like I know that I can. I think right now the thing that's testing me and testing that belief is marathon training, right? So I've recently started to train for marathons and it's hard to be bad at something, right? Like candidly, like I'm 30 years old. I didn't think I would be like trying new hobbies and it's embarrassing to be bad at stuff, right? Like as a kid, I used to run a 6 minute mile. Now I'm like out of breath and I'm running 10-minute miles, right? But like I just have to remember, like, if I have this long-term goal, which is to qualify for the Boston Marathon, which is like impossible, I have to remember that, like, I need to have this belief in myself even when things feel hard, right? Like the first two marathons didn't go that well. And I would say like that first year, first sec fund was like really hard. Like I didn't know if we were gonna make it after that past that first year. But at the end of the day, like the belief, the determination, the grit, and then just doing something every day to improve ultimately led me to where I am today. So hopefully you and I are having a conversation in 3 years of me having qualified for the Boston Marathon.
Let's go.
But I'm going to continue the same approach of you know believing and then doing something daily to improve myself towards that goal.
So, all right. So, number one, what's your favorite New York neighborhood and why?
Ooh, I mean, I'm gonna have to go with my own neighborhood. I live in Bed-Stuy, and I've lived there now for 6 years and a year when I first moved to New York.
Mhm.
I've been in New York now for 9 years, which is hard to believe. Almost the same amount of time I lived in LA, which is also crazy to think about. But I've just been fortunate to build community in the neighborhood. I have my like little local coffee shop that I love. There's a good
Right.
slice shop up the street from me called Cuts and Slices. So love Bed-Stuy.
What's the most New Yorker thing you've seen this week?
Most New Yorker thing I've seen this week is just all the unpaved snow.
True. What's your bodega order? Go.
Oh, bodega order, I always get I mean, this is corny, but chopped cheese, and then I get a Snapple.
All right. Oh, I love it. What's your go to late night food spot?
I'm not out late anymore as a
Right.
result of me being 32, but any place that sells a pasta slice.
Okay. What's your only in New York life hack? Only in New York.
Only in New York life hack, start taking the train the direction you're supposed to go if your train is not coming, because if there's delays, you don't wanna be stuck for too long, so just head in the direction, and then if you need to, walk.
There we go. One New York hill that you'll die on.
One New York hill that I'll That's a tough question. Oh my god, that you stumped me. New York Hill, I'll die on.
Okay, okay, let's pass out. What's your favorite subway line, and what does it say about you?
Easy. Favorite subway line is the BDFM because one takes me home and one takes me to Yankee Stadium, and I'm a huge Yankees fan.
There we go. What's the best $10 you can spend in New York?
Oh, best $10 you can spend in New York. I would say, oh, what's the name of the place? There's a place in Midtown Manhattan that sells. It's a bar, but it has free unlimited hot dogs while you're there.
Oh,
So before a baseball game, you go get a $5 beer, and then you have like 3 or 4 hot dogs. It's great.
the best. What's one place in New York you take visitors that never fail?
I would say anywhere with a view, right? Like, New York is extremely beautiful, and so if you can get someone at a high vantage point, it's a great way to see the city.
It's really concrete jungle, right? It's hard to explain, but even if it's like concrete and buildings, there's some serenity to it.
You can't see the scale of it until you're up high.
Exactly. Okay, finish this sentence. New York taught me blank.
New York taught me that anything is possible and any dream is possible in this city specifically.
Awesome. So thank you. What would be your final remarks to the emerging leaders that are listening?
Yeah, I mean, just to find your community to help you bring your dream to life, I think, without the folks I've encountered in my time on your dreams and just in my time in New York in general, I wouldn't have accomplished anything that I did. So just find your people and build together.
If you're serious about making better decisions in your life, career, or business, subscribe to the Powerhouse. Every episode, we unpack one real decision under pressure so you can learn from leaders across New York City. And if there's someone whose story we should feature next, drop their name in the comments. I'm JG, and I'll see you in the next episode.